Hello, and welcome to this virtual event, Attitude is Everything, Challenging Gender Stereotypes. I'm Melanne Verveer, the director of the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. And we are launching today a new series, a 5-part series, The Way Forward, Accelerating Progress for Women and Girls. The series is based on a groundbreaking report that we released earlier, marking the 25th anniversary of the 4th World Conference on Women that the UN held in Beijing all of those years ago. It's an initiative we undertook in partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation and with the collaboration of Secretary Clinton and 25 global women leaders. The report is available on our website, and the link will be posted in your chat box. It looks at the progress on gender equality that has been achieved over the last 25 years. But all of us know that progress hasn't gone far enough, and there is a long journey ahead to accelerate that progress. But how do we do that? The report lays out a way forward to overcome some of the toughest barriers that still stand in the way of the progress we would all like to see. And this series will look at those barriers and how to overcome them. One of the toughest obstacles is what we will begin to speak about today, what we are focused on: how to change attitudes, norms, mindsets, biases, conscious or unconscious, those deeply entrenched practices that stand in the way, that hold women back, whether it's from participating politically or reinforcing sole responsibility for childcare and household duties, the way it contributes to pay discrepancy or job segregation. These barriers continue to be an enormous obstacle. I want to welcome more than our 1,000 participants who are with us via Zoom today, and the hundreds more who are joining on Facebook. You are with us from over 100 countries, and we welcome each and every one of you. We have already received many pre-submitted questions from our audience members. You will also have the opportunity to submit questions to the speakers throughout the discussion by using the Q&A feature on your computer. Just note your name, your affiliation, and to whom you are directing your question. We are pleased to be able to organize this series with the Georgetown Ambassadors for Women, Peace, and Security and the Rockefeller Foundation, our partner on the report and leader in elevating this agenda. And now to begin. Dr. Anisha Fritz is the chair of the Georgetown Ambassadors for Women, Peace, and Security. They are a community of influential women who amplify the work of the Institute to advance women globally. Anisha has worked across all sectors in the academy as an NGO leader and CEO of a company. She's been a lecturer, an author, a consultant on humanitarian relief, as well as on global entrepreneurship. And she is the proprietor of the Linn-Mar Estate. Anisha, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for your support and efforts in making this series possible. Anisha.
Thank you, Melanne. The Georgetown Ambassadors for Women, Peace, and Security are so excited to sponsor this series with the Rockefeller Foundation. We are a global community of women leaders, as Melanne said, from private sector, the academy, government, and the NGO communities who are passionate about women's empowerment. We know that peace, security, and economic development are more effective when women are involved, and at the same time crucial for women to express our voices and achieve our potential. This virtual series is based on a flagship report that the Institute did, sponsored by the Rockefeller Foundation, outlining a way forward for gender equality. In this series, we will bring the report to life, highlighting best practices and ways that each of us, wherever we live and whatever we do, can be part of the solution. Thank you all so much for being here and for doing your part to advance women and girls. Malan?
Thank you, Anisha. And now let me turn to my colleague, Jenny Klugman, the Managing Director of the Institute. She leads our research portfolio and is an authority on gender equality, poverty, and human development. She was the lead author of the report and is going to give us a brief overview of the report content that our panel is then going to be discussing. So Jenny, get us set.
Well, thank you, Milan, and good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to be here to help launch the follow-up discussions around the Beijing Plus 25 agenda based on the report that we published last September. We have such an august panel with rich and deep experience, so my role is very much limited to a brief overview highlighting what we covered in the report on resetting gender norms, which was one of 5 key levers as shown in this slide, alongside bridging gaps between law and practice, countering backlash to gender equality, fostering accountability, and harnessing technology. And as Ambassador Verveer mentioned, these will be covered in subsequent sessions of this series. It's immediately clear that these levers are closely interconnected, but at the same time, it's also increasingly recognized that norms are central, and perhaps we should have put them at the center of this wheel. Gender norms drive expectations, attitudes, and behaviors about the roles of men and women, boys and girls. Gender norms change over time, but they're also often very sticky, and the pace of change is often slow. And how change happens is very much shaped by the context and the impacts of specific actions, and change is also hard to measure. At the same time, in putting together this report, we found a number of important efforts and reforms at both the institutional and grassroots levels that have paid off. There are different ways to approach this topic, and we chose to highlight a series of promising pathways to help reset gender norms. And these are illustrated across the top bar of this slide, beginning with recognizing and redistributing unpaid care. The graph on the left here highlights gender gaps in unpaid work for selected OECD countries that are, of course, directly linked to gender norms, with very large gaps, as you can see, in Turkey and India at the top, but also in Italy and Australia, for example. Looking for promising ways to help redistribute unpaid work at home led to some very promising examples. Encouraging men to take time off after the birth of their child through paid leave, family leave policies, and the types of programs in which Promundo has been engaged, and I'm sure Gary Barker will speak to further. Secondly, we looked at ways in which pay gaps, persistent gaps between men and women's earnings can be addressed. And here, the importance of transparency came to the fore, which a number of countries are experimenting with, not indeed beyond experimenting, have mandated, including the UK, Denmark and Iceland. And then we also highlighted experiences in combating occupational segregation, the tendency of women and men to go into different jobs and careers, which underpins gaps in pay in too many countries around the world. And then more broadly, we looked at the ways in which media affects and shapes gender norms. And there are examples of campaigns being used to promote progressive change. We found examples including Afghanistan and raising awareness about new legislation, as well as the ways in which advertising can operate, not only in traditional ways to underpin gender stereotypes, but more progressive efforts, as we'll be hearing from Procter & Gamble, and more innovative approaches. Working with men and boys is by now a very well recognized and oft-cited piece of the puzzle. However, I think it's fair to say that it's more often mentioned than successfully pursued. And here again, I think Gary and Promundo will highlight their experience, probably the leading global organization on this front with impressive results. There's also important and growing evidence around models known as SASA, broadly speaking. It's an acronym from the Swahili, which emphasizes the role of community empowerment programs, which have been used successfully to combat gender-based violence, emphasizing changes in understanding at the family and community levels. Getting girls into school is clearly important, and there's been important progress on this over the past 25 years. But getting girls into school is not enough. We also need to expand life skills as well as girls' own aspirations. In too many places, education levels have risen, but not in tandem with economic and other opportunities. And we know that this is also closely related to efforts to combat early marriage, which I'm sure we'll be hearing about from Natalia and others. What we did in the report was highlight some promising examples again from Uganda and the work of BRAC, the role that cash transfers can play in changing incentives and attitudes towards the value of girls and girls' education, and of course, reducing child marriage. And then finally, but not least, we focused on the importance of engaging with traditional and religious leaders. And that's very much the work, important agenda that Tostan has been pursuing successfully for many years now. Around the world, we see that religion often plays a key role in reinforcing traditional norms, and often ways that serve as a brake on gender equality, as we see in the context of sexual and reproductive health. And at the same time, and for the same reasons, that's why engaging religious leaders in efforts to change gender norms is critical. And here I'm very much looking forward to hearing from our colleagues at Tostan and talk about the work that they've been doing on this front. We have other examples in the report, including from Nigeria and elsewhere, which I hope now you're inspired to download and read. So let me turn back to Milan to introduce our august panel and continue with the program. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jenny, and thanks for helping us set the context here for this conversation. We have one of the exceptional leaders in this space with us today, whom I'm happy to introduce now, Dr. Natalia Kanem, the Executive Director of the UN Population Fund. She is among the highest ranking women leaders at the United Nations and the first Latin American to head UNFPA. She has previously held several positions there, starting as a representative in Tanzania. Earlier, she was an official at the Ford Foundation. Dr. Kanem was a key contributor to our report, providing invaluable insights on innovative approaches to changing deep-seated norms. And we're so pleased to have you with us today, Natalia, to kick off this conversation.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Verveer, and thank you to the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security for hosting this gathering and also for playing such an important role of promoting peace and stable and just societies with women at the center as the norm. So I'm really happy to be here with everyone. And I just want to start by observing that too often peace is measured by the silence of the guns. But is a woman at peace when she's facing violence in her own home? Is a young girl at peace when she's being harassed on the way to school? Is a young woman at peace when she is living in fear of a harmful practice like female genital mutilation or being married off young? When we tackle these harmful gender norms that perpetuate these violations and almost normalize them, tackling this is one of the surest ways, I think, to speed up progress towards that world that we want. And it's a world that's more peaceful and it's certainly gender equal. That's central to our work at UNFPA. We're the United Nations Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency. And in the 155 locations where we work every single day, we're working with partners. And at the root of this work is addressing those type of negative gender stereotypes, the social norms, that can physically as well as psychologically harm women and girls, that can deter them and depress their ambition and not allow them to access life-saving sexual and reproductive health information, services, and protection. And what we see right around the world is that everywhere these norms transcend generations and they transcend cultures, something like sun preference, for example. And in vastly different places, we find striking resemblance in the stereotypes of femininity, masculinity, everything in between, what it means to be a real man, what it means to be a good woman, and how people are expected to behave. So in that context, ideas are reinforced constantly. And this has the consequence of unequal power distribution. What we're talking about is power based on gender stereotype and the resources that we're going to find to change that attitude, starting with the girl herself, who from a very young age has to believe that she has rights, has to believe that we're going to stand up for her and defend her full equality. And so UNFPA finds that changing these discriminatory norms that actually violate the rights of women and girls, that actually curtail their full potential, it doesn't happen overnight. You need slow, steady work led by community leaders, and you need communities to coalesce and come together. And I'm excited to know that we'll probably be talking about some of this here today. And for UNFPA, what we've learned is that if you want this change to be real, if you want power to be put in the hands of women as a lasting change, then we don't let men and boys off the equation. We bring them in as partners, as stakeholders, and it's exciting to see young men in particular who are transforming the idea of safety for their sister, their mother, their neighbor next door. In Zambia, UNFPA runs safe spaces, and in these spaces, young people, adolescent girls and boys, can express their fears, they can talk about relationships, and help each other with their aspirations, relate to each other better. This education has to start young. I'm a doctor, but education is our watchword, and you'll hear more about that, I bet, later from Molly as well. Comprehensive sexuality education, teaching someone about their body, not as a source of mystery, but as a source of age-appropriate understanding of both the pleasure and the danger that can accrue if you're naive, if you're ignorant, if anyone can convince you of anything, if someone can try to coerce you and you don't understand that you can scream at the top of your lungs because you have rights. So the values of respect, equality, and consent underpin what we're talking about today. And let me just close by saying that traditional leaders have really stepped up in certain regions to protect women and girls, and also to break social norms, that identity crisis that young men can have. I'll give the example of Niger and across West Africa, where we run these écoles de mari, they're husband schools. And the idea is that you constructively engage husbands, men and boys, cultural and religious leaders to improve the health outcomes for women and girls, and to strike the understanding that contraception, family planning, and respecting the rights of women is part and parcel of development of the community. So we're trying to be innovative. I hope we'll hear ideas here today as to how we're going to change these persistent gender norms and inequalities, which have only been reinforced during this era of COVID. It's a crisis within a crisis for gender equality. And at the same time, let us not lose sight of the fact UNFPA works with governments to change law and policy, right? These discriminatory norms in South Korea, labor laws and employment opportunities for women changing there, these were a key driver in shifting the norms around son preference and the value of girls and at what age girls get married. And I think in many countries where women still need the authority of a man in their life, their husband, their spouse, their male family member, their father, just to access healthcare or family planning, it's going to take our combined leadership, partnership at every level to be successful. So as we move forward into 2021, with 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals as the dateline, I have every confidence that we'll be able to figure this out and move together to bring a world into being of health, of prosperity for everyone, leaving no one behind, truly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalia. Truly leaving no one behind. And you unpacked so much in your remarks that we're now going to tease out in the panel discussion. But I think when you said that change doesn't come overnight, that's something we have to keep in mind, but truly understand those approaches that could be tapped, that in the end will make that kind of difference. So thank you for what you do. And thank you for your help with the report and, and for being with us today. I'm going to now turn to our panel. We are really thrilled to have each of them with us today. They will focus on 3 different approaches to tackle our topic here. I have seen their efforts, their commitment, their innovative approaches firsthand. And we are really very excited to have each of them here to share those experiences and their work over many years with each of you. I'm going to begin with Molly Melching. She is the founder and creative director of Tostan, which you've already heard reference to. It's a groundbreaking NGO founded in Senegal in 1991. Its mission is to empower African communities to bring about sustainable development and positive social transformation based on respect for human rights. Tostan is well known for its creative education programs, again, that word education, that have led to the abandonment, to the renunciation of the practice of female genital cutting, for example, and child forced marriage in community after community across the continent. Molly has lived and worked for decades in Senegal, where I first met her more than 20 years ago. It was an eye-opening experience for me then to see how simple villagers were transforming their communities. She is credited with creating many development and communications techniques that promote positive African values and use traditional ways of learning. And she's the author of However Long the Night. So before we hear from Molly, let's look at the impact of Tostan's work.
En grandissant au Sénégal, il était normal que les filles de mon village subissent l'excision, moi y comprise. Puis, à 14 ans, j'étais obligée de quitter l'école pour épouser un homme plus âgé. J'étais déprimée quand j'ai dû abandonner mes études. En fait, j'ai beaucoup souffert. Quand j'étais plus âgée, j'ai été la première à m'inscrire au programme d'éducation de Tostan dans mon village. De là, j'ai appris beaucoup sur la démocratie, les droits humains, la santé, la gestion des projets et bien d'autres choses encore. Cette expérience m'a fait découvrir un tout nouveau monde. J'ai été ensuite choisie comme facilitatrice pour mener le programme Tostan dans d'autres villages. J'ai aussi mené des discussions sur l'excision dans mon village et dans les villages où nous avons de la famille étendue. Nous avons bien étudié cette pratique et les conséquences qu'elle peut causer. Je suis fière de dire aujourd'hui que ces villages ont décidé d'abandonner les pratiques de l'excision et du mariage des enfants. Elles sont encouragées à aller à l'école et à se marier avec la personne de leur choix. Les femmes ont maintenant le droit d'exprimer leurs opinions. Elles ont le droit à l'éducation et à la santé. Et maintenant, je partage régulièrement ces droits humains avec des milliers d'autres personnes à travers une émission que j'anime à la radio en langue pulaar. Aujourd'hui, j'ai grand espoir que de mon vivant, je verrai la fin de ces pratiques pour que toutes les filles de l'Afrique puissent s'épanouir.
Molly, it's so wonderful to have you with us today. And I want you to be able to explain to all of us the approach you use in Tostan, which has been really incredibly successful in changing gender norms, in particular ending female genital mutilation. But I know that you and the activists call it female genital cutting. And also other deeply entrenched practices. What are you doing that enables this success to be possible? What's its impact been? And perhaps most importantly today, what can we learn from Tostan? And not just lessons about what to do, but sometimes it's lessons about what not to do. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador Verver. It's such an honor for me to be here on this panel all the way from Senegal. And thanks also to Binta for sharing her story with everyone. You have asked about the impact of the Tostan program and particularly related to female genital cutting. So I would like to start by sharing with everyone that just this last December, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, women, men, and youth leaders in 485 rural communities in 3 West African countries with a high prevalence of female genital cutting sent a letter to their local authorities to announce their decision to collectively end the practices of female genital cutting and child marriage. These community members from Guinea, Mali, and the Gambia had just completed participation in Tostan's 3-year community empowerment program, which was implemented in their own national languages, so important. The participants in the program had reached out to discuss at length with other communities in their social network, inviting them to join in this movement for better health and well-being, and over 300 communities responded to their call. They have thus joined over 9,000 other communities in 8 West and East African countries who have made the decision to abandon the practices of FGC and child marriage as a result of Tostan's education program. At these public declarations, community women, men, children, religious leaders, health agents, and local authorities speak out on national radio and television, explaining why they have collectively decided to end these practices. Internal and external evaluations over the years have indicated actually that these public declarations can greatly contribute to ending the practice at a larger scale. For as in the case of other social norms, we always say enough people need to see and hear that enough other people like them are actually ending the practice. Well, as you can imagine, as you have all said on the panel, and it is a decision that is very difficult. It is not easy to end such a deeply entrenched practice like FGC, one that formerly had great value to people, and it just didn't happen overnight. It was a long process, and it may surprise you that ending FGC is not the main objective of the Tostan program, and it never has been. Over the last 30 years, we have continuously focused on providing a holistic, multidimensional, human-based education program to rural populations, which offers the information and life skills that people need to be better prepared to lead their own development. You know, when I arrived in Senegal 46 years ago, I had the wonderful opportunity to travel to many rural communities. And, you know, I just was so deeply saddened by the fact that so many people whom I met in villages particularly, and girls and women had never been to school or had dropped out early, often to be married, like Binta in the film, at 13 or 14 years old. They had such little access to information and materials in their own language, and they lacked literacy and project management skills. So at Tostan, we have sought to provide an alternative education program that will support partner communities to identify and then be able to achieve their own goals and priorities for the future. And I'm excited to say that the program offers a welcoming and a very joyful environment where participants can learn new information and discuss openly in a respectful, non-judgmental space. I think it's so important. I also think that using elements of African culture, the songs, the stories, theater, poetry, drawings, and of course, lots of music and lots of dancing, led to participants feeling comfortable and able to open up and to discuss issues that they had never previously even dared to question. It was in this way that women themselves were the ones who brought up their desire to learn more about female genital cutting. But it was in 1996 when Tostan added principles of women's rights into our program that we witnessed a real increase in impact from our program. Suddenly, women participants began speaking out publicly and with great confidence. They started doing more critical thinking around practices that did not lead to their aspirations of well-being, and they immediately started taking action. Their voices spread out from the classroom to the community, and then to even larger spaces as they shared with other communities where women and girls underwent the same practices. Now, luckily, we also learned very early on, almost immediately after we started this program on women's rights, that it was absolutely essential to have the support of boys, husbands, and traditional and religious leaders in the process of this social change. We learned that lesson really the hard way. As I said, we originally introduced women's rights into our program, but soon we had a real backlash from, as you can imagine, from men in the communities, who even went so far as to close certain of our centers. So after we listened very carefully to their concerns, their fears, their suspicions, we realized it was really important to promote all people's rights, human rights, men's, women's, and children's rights, so that the men could relate and feel included in the process. We even developed a special sharing seminar for community imams and traditional leaders. And then they were able to align the principles of human rights and responsibilities, because we always emphasize also the responsibilities that go along with human rights. And they then were able to align them with their deeper values and also with their holy scriptures. They thus no longer stood opposed to those new changes. But by including the men, they now always join in and contribute to a collective effort for positive change. This has led to systemic transformation, where entire communities and their extended social networks are abandoning harmful practices today. They are also ending domestic violence. They're promoting also positive health behaviors. And I'm really proud to say that over 30,000 women have emerged as leaders at community and now even at the district level, running as they campaign on a platform of human rights. Now in Senegal, there's a proverb that says, "It is better to find a path out than to stand and yell at the forest." At Tostan, our major takeaway and learnings from women like Binta is that education, as you have all said, is the path forward, but not just any education. And I'm not even talking about providing 18 or 25 years of schooling that many of us on this call have already. But I'm talking about an empowering, human rights-based, inclusive, holistic, joyful, and culturally relevant education in a language in which people can express themselves fully as they actively participate in creating the conditions for well-being in their communities. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Molly. I remember so well, you're telling me years ago that one of these major changes, norm changing, was the women went from, and the village went from FGC to women's health, to women's well-being, and the whole community went and made that transition with them, understanding how important it was. So education, human rights, engagement of the community, including traditional leaders, religious leaders. All of this is part and parcel of your approach. So speaking of male engagement, we're really thrilled to have with us Gary Barker now to engage in this conversation and take it forward. Gary is the founder and CEO of Promundo, a leading global voice in engaging men and boys in advancing gender equality and positive masculinities. Gary's also the founder of Men Care, a global campaign working in 45 countries to promote men's involvement as caregivers, and co-founders he also is of Men Engage, which many of us have heard of over and over because it's an alliance now of more than 700 NGOs. And if that weren't enough, Gary's also involved as the creator and leader of Images, the International Men and Gender Equality Survey, the largest ever survey of men's attitudes and behaviors related to issues like violence, fatherhood, gender equality, etc. An advisor to many international organizations and to all of us who better want to understand the importance of male allies in the struggle for gender equality. So before we bring Gary into the conversation, let's look a little bit at the work of Promundo.
Minha mãe, uma vez, quando ele bateu na porta, minha mãe abriu, ele estava alcoolizado, estava bêbado, e deu um soco. Tinha que mostrar que ele era homem.
mbese abanza kuvuga ati niba umwohereje ku ishuri kikaba ikindi kibazo, numva cya gikomere cyanjye kirazamutse.
පිරිමියාය මේම තමයි ඉන්න ඕනේ. ඒ කියන්නේ ගේනුගේ වැඩ කරන්න කොහොමත් අකමැත්තේනේ. ඒ වුණාට මට මම අම්බ කරලා දෙනවා. එයා ගෙදර ඉඳලා කරනවා. ඒ ඔක්කොම එයා බලාගයි.
Eu ficava dentro do meu quarto, digamos assim, trancadão, isso aqui ninguém mexe. A partir daquele momento ali, eu vendo a história de cada aquilo ali me serviu para que eu pudesse ser curado daquilo.
මට ඉස්සරලාම පොඩ්ඩක් ලැජ්ජ වුණා. මේ මාස 3ෙම ගියා වගේ. වෙන එකක් මගේ තුල එඟට ආවා වගේ දැනුණා.
ufite umukobwa we mu buhe buryo nyamara n'umukobwa wanjye, nkumva ni ibintu nawe bimushimye kuba yarahindutse bifite umusaruro ushimishije.
Essa ferramenta é poderosa diante de uma comunidade de transformação. Ela não vem de um monte, ela vem pingo, 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 então torna aquele rio forte.
So moving. I couldn't help watching it, Gary, about the term co-beneficiary, which has been a big part of Promundo's work, that men engaged with women and girls on promoting gender equality is not just about the women and girls. It provides enormous benefits and rewards to men. So tell us about the approach that you use, why it's having the impact we're seeing. It's becoming an evidence-based case. And what kind of obstacles you confront that have to be overcome in this work.
Great. Thank you, Ambassador Verveer, for the questions and for including us in this discussion. And we're thrilled that some of our approaches are included in the study you're releasing today. And I think I'll start a little bit with our philosophy. And I think you touched exactly what it is about. Of our objective as an organization and our contributions to the Men Care campaign and to Men Engage, our objective is not engaging men. Our objective is a gender just world. it is about gender equality and gender justice. And I think that helps us keep it centered, that this work was born out of the work that feminists and feminist activists have been doing from Beijing and far before. And in fact, our founding date, not coincidentally, starts 3 years after Cairo and 2 years after Beijing, because our walking papers are really, our marching orders come from there. And I think that makes us keep the focus that the work is relational. It is about how we interact around it. It's both men and women, but also individuals of other sexual minorities, trying to figure out how we collectively overcome this thing we call. It also makes us, learn from the example of great work to empower women, which is to say, it doesn't sit in the program box. There are lots of amazing things we must do with really well-designed programs, but if patriarchy and gender inequality are constructed so much on a daily basis, the norms and the power dimensions in the institutions that shape our lives, health and education, community leadership, the political bodies where things happen, militaries, the media, we must work at those levels to think about how do we promote healthy, equitable masculinities. And so that's really what we try to do, is to do it at that level. Some successes, and I could easily make a list, and I'll come to the obstacles of, every success is on the back of 3 failures of figuring out what does it take to change ideas about masculinities and engage men. Our work on fatherhood and men as caregivers. Not just yes, the program matters, but really turning it into changes at the policy level, doing the research and the conversations with policymakers to get more equitable paid leave on the books, which we've contributed to that in the District of Columbia, which came online in July with some of the most advanced leave policies in the US. We've done that in Brazil, partners in Netherlands, South Africa, Colombia, where there's a debate going on, and we've provided the analysis to increase the number of days for men, and then to think about what we need to do for men to do it, not taking days away from women or from mothers, but adding days for men themselves. I would say our partnership in Rwanda with the public health sector, you saw a snippet of it there. And it's not just that we have an evidence-based program, which we do, which has shown women's reports after their male partner participates in it, showing a reduction in violence by 40 to 50%, measuring that change, and it still holds 2 years later. The important part is to say the Ministry of Health and ROMREC, the NGO that's leading this in Rwanda, are saying we're going to make this a national program. It may become one of the few countries with a nationally available fathering and parent training program that includes men and women, available to all couples who are expecting a child. That's going to be a slow scale up because we want to do it well and thoughtfully, not to undo any benefits to women. So we want to do it with all do no harm processes involved, but thrilled that it's going nationwide. I would cite partnerships. You mentioned our International Men and Gender Equality Survey, carried out now in more than 45 countries, many times in partnership with UNFPA, where we've been able to use that as a starting point to say, what are the big scale policies we need to change harmful ideas about manhood, to engage men as allies in this work. Our work with cash transfer programs and social protection. Some of the success stories of women's empowerment and poverty alleviation in the last years. We've looked at how to build on, not get rid of, but to say, look, the women-focused nature of the vast majority of social protection, whether that's cash transfer or other means, that's working. Our argument has been it can work better if we think about strategic, do no harm ways of engaging men as allies. And we've been involved in conversations at the national level in Colombia, Brazil, and a few sub-Saharan African countries as well, to say, how do you build this into your programming? Not creating separate streams for the work with men, not changing the women-centered focus of social protection, but adding men as allies to it. I'd say our partnerships with the media. More recently, we have started to work with the Gina Davis Institute, looking on if we are spending so much time online, and that's a global phenomenon, and certainly during COVID, as we've watched how much our young people in particular are spending time online, how do we question the way that media shapes our perceptions around gender and around healthy masculinity? Just done a study on what boys are watching on TV, and are about to launch one on what boys are playing in video games, and the misogyny and sexism present there. How do we take that on? And finally, I'd mentioned some of our partnerships with the corporate sector. We've got Procter & Gamble represented here, We've partnered with a couple of other big brands on how to use the power of their voice to be good corporate citizens for gender equality, to promote healthy masculinity, and also to use their huge footprint in ads to change and promote healthy ideas about masculinity. So finally, that's, that's usually where we start as the success part. Let's talk about the continuing and challenging obstacles. One is to be accountable in this work. We can often, I think it's fantastic when we have young men and older men really wanting to be voices in this space. And we need that, but we also have to say this work is accountable to the women's rights field, to individual women, to sexual minorities, that this is about a dialogue, not about celebrating a few men who are doing the work that needs to be done. And I think that's a challenging one that we need to talk about. I think the other big challenge is how do we talk about this work in a way that we move beyond us versus them? That somehow gender equality is men versus women, women versus men, that women's gains are seen as men's losses. Look, power and privilege are a challenge. We do need men to give up some aspects of power and privilege, no question about it. When we get the US Congress to be 50-50, some men are not going to get reelected. When we have heads of universities being 50% women, some men are not going to be deans. No question about that, and let us not shy away from saying that. But at the same time, we've got to say we benefit, we as men have skin in the game of a world that is more just. We get to have better relationships. We get to interact with others in ways that don't include violence. We help, and we are part of a world where our sisters and mothers and partners are not afraid of the violence from other men. And we stop being frightened of the violence from other men too. So it's not making false equivalence in that, but it's to say we need men to see our stake in this, not as opposition to it. And then finally, I'd say we've got to go beyond the superficial. I'm thrilled that there's a lot more spaces where engaging men is there, but this is not just a one-off, a male champion who's leader of an organization walks in the room and says, go women, and we're done. It's also not, what's become the trend of the day of our 45-minute unconscious bias or diversity and inclusion talk. As important as those topics are, we know that a 45-minute PowerPoint doesn't undo patriarchy, power, and harmful gender norms. So I think it's kind of keeping our eyes wide open of how long this work is going to take, the structural nature that must be there, and to look at those thorny conversations to say this is not us versus them.
Thanks so much, Gary. So much wisdom in what you said. And I think you're right. So often we hear male allies, men engaged, male champions, and to what end? And what you just laid out is that it is part of a deeper process. It is complex, but it's about skin in the game. It's really about male self-interest, the interest of all of us together, truly the meaning of justice. So thanks so much for what you're doing, and we'll go back and hear some more from you in the Q&A. You mentioned media, and I want to turn now to the private sector to just show us some of the many approaches as we try to address this question that we're working on today of norms and changing harmful norms. I want to turn to Allison Tuman Camphouse, who is the Global Program Leader for Gender Equality and Community Impact at Procter & Gamble. She's been with P&G for more than 24 years and manages their efforts to be a force for good in communities around the globe. And she coordinates the company's significant and truly significant gender equality activities across the company and the communities in which it serves. She's on the Global Citizens, Women and Girls Advocacy Board, the Children's Corporate Council, and so many other forces that make such a difference for good. Among many others, she's a frequent speaker on topics like public-private partnerships, something else we talk a lot about today, in addition to gender equality and related issues. I've had the pleasure of working with Allison over many years and have seen firsthand why P&G is one of the most admired companies in the world. It is committed to diversity, to equity, to inclusion, but it also makes conscious efforts to truly be a force for good. And one of the ways it does that is through its advertising, which we're going to hear about today in the context of changing attitudes. And so we're going to watch 2 ads. The first one is called Choose Equal. And then the second one is called Share the Load. Takes place in India, but it really could take place any place when you look at the issue, which is how we share this burden of caregiving and household chores. So let's look at these 2 ads, and then let's hear from Allison about P&G's engagement.
This is not new. This has happened before.
In every downturn
and disaster in history, gender equality has been set back
as women have stepped forward.
Women always bear a heavy cost.
More of the frontline care.
More of the pay cuts.
More of the jobs lost.
More of the responsibilities at home.
Keeping them from going back to paid work.
These times
are not unprecedented,
but they give us another chance for equality.
If we all choose to step forward as equals.
Care equal.
Hire equal.
Pay equal.
Model equal.
Do equal.
Choose equal.
At home.
At work.
Right now.
For an equal future.
मैं पूरन पोली बना रही हूँ, तेरे भाई की फेवरेट। तेरे रूम की क्या हालत बना रखी है इसने ना, बस पूछ मत। हाँ, तो तू बता रही हूँ सुबह सुबह कैसे फोन किया? ऑफिस नहीं गई? क्या जॉब छोड़ दिया मतलब? अरे ऐसे कैसे? कितनी तरक्की हुई थी तुम्हारी, ये हम भी कितना प्राउड फील कर रहे थे। अचानक ये जॉब छोड़ना, रियू कैसे?
क्या हुआ?
दीदी जॉब छोड़ रही है।
क्यों?
पर बेटा शादी के बाद घर के काम बढ़ जाते हैं, लेकिन तू अकेली थोड़ी है। आकाश भी तो है तुम्हारे साथ, वो घर के काम में तुम्हारी हेल्प कर सकता है ना? अरे उसे घर का काम नहीं आता मतलब? ऐसे कैसे नहीं आता? नहीं आता होगा। गलती हमारी है। बेटियों को पैरों पे खड़ा होना सिखाते हैं, लेकिन बेटों को हाथ बटाना नहीं सिखाते। तो और एक बार सोच ले, मैं रात को फोन करती हूँ।
क्या हुआ माँ? क्या हुआ माँ?
गलती हो गई, सुधार रही हूँ।
Share the load. Thanks so much to P&G and Allison, to you. Let's talk a little bit about why does a company like P&G do this kind of advertising? Why does it matter? How do you see advertising in terms of changing attitudes and biases? And what are some of the ways that the campaigns that you've embarked on have been successful? And that ad was obviously taking place in India, but you are a global company. How do you contextualize these ads and your message in these various settings?
Thanks, Milan, and hi, everyone. I do appreciate the invitation. Thanks to you and the Institute and the Rockefeller Foundation, and of course, all the other fellow participants this morning. I think it's been a pleasure to work with the Beijing 25 group and in the report, because while this important critical work is happening on the ground, and Gary just spoke about how to engage men, in a deeper way and to change, these long-held beliefs, advertising and media, as we just heard from, really does have an impact. And we work today, over 183 years. We've been in business with a whole family of brands. You just saw Ariel there, but there's many, many more that people know. And for us, this really is part of how, we can work to change some of these deeply held gender biases that exist. And it's these biases that are reinforcing so many of the greatest barriers that are still in the way of women and girls' progress. And so advertising and communications do shape how people see the world. And we know that when done well, we can spark conversations, that can lead to changing mindsets about women and girls, but also how men and boys can engage. So our approach is pretty broad. There's the advertising itself, but we also look across all of our core business operations and functions, supply chains, distribution networks. And we know that, through the footprint of the private sector and our business operations, which are on the ground in 70 countries, and our brands are in, I think, 180 these days, we really can have an impact. And so in the media and advertising communications, we start with something fairly simple, and it's really looking for an accurate portrayal of people, all people, women and girls, everyone in their humanity, because when people see accurate portrayal, that starts to create new norms and new imprints in people's minds about, what is acceptable, what is normal, and how we can see things from a different light than maybe has existed in the past. So we try to make sure, in this case, we show men and boys as equal partners in the home. We see them doing unpaid care work, like changing diapers or nappies in our Pampers ads, or cleaning floors, or washing up, or in this Ariel example, doing laundry. And we know that those repetitive images showing a diverse collection of people sharing that work and sharing the load, so to speak, like the Ariel campaign, can over time make quite a difference. The other way we tackle this is not just sort of what's in the advertising itself, but we often can use our voice to take a stand on specific issues. And we've seen that, nearly all the issues, 12 or more from the Beijing Platform for Action, are ones that we and many other companies are also doing. And so you see campaigns like A Girl, or SK2's Change Destiny, Face the STEM Gap is an Olay campaign that's launched. We're tackling things like pay equity or gender-based violence, education, STEM, health, women's leadership, all those areas where, changing that conversation, or possibly even just shifting norms enough that then the really hard work, the policy work, the collaborative work, the community work on the ground that Molly spoke to about what Tostin's been doing, we're just trying to create perhaps a bit more of an enabling environment for those conversations and collaborations to take place. So it's really two ways: portrayal in the advertising and taking a stand. But then we're also very deliberate about this. And this is something that we do measure. It's just like our business plans. We have a clear objective, and that's a very high bar, which is 100% positive portrayal, accurate portrayal of women and girls in our advertising. And then we start measuring, and we have the gender equality measure, which is 4 simple questions that the ANA, Association of National Advertisers in the US, the See Her movement created. And there's now a new one from See All, which is looking at cultural and multicultural portrayal. And then we've also, peer pressure also works. We've challenged others in our industry to step up and do that as well. And so, we can have quite an impact if you think about all the brands and all the companies around the globe who are advertising to consumers and can really start to show humanity and women and girls, especially, in their full and accurate portrayal. You asked me about some of our campaigns and which ones have been successful. I'll just say a little bit more about Share the Load in India. That began in 2015 with a fairly provocative question, which was, is laundry only a woman's job in the home? And it was really designed to look at the unequal distribution of chores. The Dad Share the Loads conversation and film that came in 2016 was really tackling that cycle of prejudice that, gets passed down. And we see this, in villages, communities, and, cultures around the globe. And the latest one, 2019, was Sons Share the Load, looking at, how we've been raising our sons as compared to our daughters, so that the future generation will be more equal. What's remarkable is, as we measure progress on this one, a really big shift has happened in those 5 years. In India, when the campaign started, 79% of men thought laundry was only a woman's job, and that was multi-generational. And now, after only 5 years, that number's down to 41%. So that's, nearly cutting that in half, is something that we want to see across multiple different norms and areas. There's others like Always Whisper and Tampax that have been tackling stigmas and taboos around menstruation over time. And of course, Like a Girl, that campaign is quite a landmark one. That saw positive association with the phrase doing something like a girl go from only 19% positive all the way to 76% just in a couple years after that campaign launched. So whether it's Gillette's work in The Best Men Can Be, like Gary mentioned about, holding other men accountable and more deeply engaged, or some of the work we're doing around pay equity with Secret, All Strength, No Sweat. There's a few more in the domestic unpaid care work, like Fairy in the UK, which is a How Fair is Home campaign. And then the brand new one launching just this week in the US with Dawn and Swiffer is called Come Clean to Close the Chore Gap. And that's all in that same vein about how do we, now that we're spending more time at home, some of us, how do we look at this unequal distribution in the home, and how do we translate that into, the power discrepancies and the unequal distribution we see for women and girls in the world. So those are a few of the campaigns that, that we've undertaken. It's a little bit about how we do it behind the scenes, and how we need to do so much more, and not lose sight of just how difficult the last year has been for women around the globe, and why we need to stay laser focused on this going forward to continue to illuminate these challenges and how people's, mindsets can shift and make some change.
That's so terrific, Allison. I'm really glad we could do the community approach, look at men and boys being engaged, and then have the private sector and the role that you and other companies are playing, but P&G is truly a leader in this space. And the consistency that you don't just do one ad, you build on those ads because of the overall goal to really go at changing attitudes. So I think this has been a wonderful composite of approaches that can be adopted to really get at this issue. We're going to turn now to our audience, which has submitted a number of questions. And I'm going to ask Allie Smith, who's our coordinator, who's been tracking these questions. Allie, you want to tell us some of them?
Sure. We have a number of questions here on just asking you all to expand on scaling up and sustaining norm change. So from Niyati Shah at the World Bank, she's asking, how do we foster scale up norm change structurally, given systems also operate often within a patriarchal structure? We have Sybil Chidiak at the Gates Foundation asking how you see governments playing a pivotal role in scaling this change. And Rachel Marcus at ODI asking to hear more about achieving change through more systemic approaches.
So who'd like to tackle any one of those? Anything you feel comfortable with? Natalia?
Well, thank you, because I think these questions really get to the heart of the matter. And I also noted in the chat an impatience, which I also feel. We're standing on work that goes back for decades, I dare say centuries. We've had activism and vocal and visible women and people across a spectrum demanding that women's rights be respected. Governments are central because we need that policy and we need that law. But the law and policy can be there. And if it doesn't translate into some kind of action, then what is it worth? So I think popularizing the idea that women are fully equal is something that women have weighed in on. We have marched, we have demanded, and what's left now is to make it stick. And this is why I insist that from a very early age, the girl herself has to know her worth, because, otherwise she'll back down from the bullying, which this really amounts to. Governments have set a standard, but it's the rights holder who makes it stick. So ultimately, I believe we've all been doing our best, but what we need now is a massive rekindling of women's rights as human rights. The Cairo platform is evergreen because it connects all the dots across the Sustainable Development Goals. And we also need the power of conviction so people don't silently give up their rights. You know, I hope this momentum that we've seen over the last couple of years will continue to build. And I hope that some of the language debates, which I have to sit through on the floor of the UN, sexual and reproductive health and rights is a thing. It's a thing because it can kill you. Domestic violence can kill you. So absolutely, we have to be vocal and visible in defending the normative rights, which is exactly, I think, why you brought us together today, Melan. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalia. Molly.
Yeah, I think the question of scaling is so important, and it's one that we've been working on. As I said, it's been 30 years now. This is our 30-year anniversary, and so we've really been thinking about when people ask us to share our program, how we can do that. So we have a three-pronged strategy, and actually it's four, because we're seeing we want to scale in the fields where we are in Senegal, Gambia, and Guinea-Bissau. These countries we want to scale to a much larger area than we are now. Of course, we're not in every region, so we feel that every girl, every woman, and well, every community deserves this type of education. And so we ourselves will do that, but we've also started training other NGOs. And so, you know, I'm very proud to say that we've had over 600 NGO leaders and activists, and we've had many religious leaders from Nigeria and Ghana, for example, but all over Senegal, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Mali, and Guinea that have come and gone through some of these trainings where we share some of the key aspects that we see have been so, so important in leading to deep social transformation and changing of social norms and helping people to understand that better ways of entering communities and deep listening that is so, so important. And we're also, scaling to other countries. We're going to Nigeria now, which is very exciting. And then working with the government. I think this is so, so, so important also. But I want to mention another scaling out that I think, really is so, so critical is when people learn, when they understand and they get the information in their own language, they are scaling out. They are the ones, and they are the ones who can actually bring about that change. It's not Molly, it's not Tostan staff, it's the people themselves. And they are so excited and motivated to have this information and to be able to share it with others and be seen as facilitators of new knowledge, new information. They don't go out fighting against the tradition. We really avoid, we're very careful of how we use language. It's a positive movement to promote well-being. Everything is framed about how can we improve well-being. And when we see practices that don't lead us to our deeper values of health and family and unity and continuing, to realize our full potential, people make that judgment. They deliberate and they decide, and it comes from within. And I think that's the most important thing. I don't think systemic change can come from outside. It has to come from within. But again, I go back to education. They need an empowering education. And we're hoping that there are other organizations doing that and that we can all join forces and bring empowering educations to people around the world, even in the United States.
You know, Molly, as you were talking, I was thinking of this scaling community to community. And I remember so well when in one community that FGC was ended, and it was the traditional leaders, the village leaders who said, but we intermarry. We need to go to the other communities and tell them what we've done.
Dimbajawa taught us what a social, that's where we, in 1997, he saw one village up, stand up alone, Dimbajawa, and said, this will not work. In order for you to end a deeply embedded social norm that has value to not just me, not just to the family, not just to the community, you need to reach out to the entire social network. If not, you will be sanctioned. You won't have a husband. You will not be respected. You'll be ostracized. And that was back in 1997. Demba Jawara, I call him, he's a villager who's never been to school, but for me, he has a PhD in wisdom and social transformation.
Allison, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was just reflecting on some of the comments, and I think the exactly what Molly was just speaking to. We see this in our efforts. While we may have a universal human insight or truth, it needs to be reflected through the local culture. And so while Always, for example, has the Like a Girl program all around the world, the way that comes to life in different countries, cultures, communities around the world looks very different. And it can be just as transformative, and it can teach, a girl who's experiencing puberty, anywhere in the world, that same sort of, they focus on confidence and that effort, but it comes through a lens where it's open and it can be heard. And the efforts around engaging boys at that time of puberty as well is really important, because that's also including sort of the next generation into that dialogue at the time it's happening, so that it doesn't become something that is just focusing on the girls, but it's focusing on the community together. So that's another area we've really emphasized in our work, is that it needs to be inclusive of men and boys in the efforts at all the different stages where we're trying to have impact and influence.
And contextualized to the local culture.
Indeed. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Gary.
Yeah, I think that is the question of the hour of, how do we take this good practice and see a bigger scale impact? We've been talking a lot lately within Promundo about scaling in versus scaling up. That is, how do we get school systems, health centers, the workplace, militaries, many other institutions to make this part of their DNA? Otherwise, we sometimes kind of feel that we as NGOs or civil society can kind of do it all in our very well thoughtful, empowering and transformative programming. But we really do need those partnerships and all those layers taking it up. And I think that's certainly what UNFPA has been so key about, both government and other sectors they work with. Second, I think we do need laws with teeth, and to hold accountable our governments to do them. Whether that's, debates about parental leave and hearing, senior policymakers talk about, can men do this? Can we make men do this? Will men do their portion of the care work? Getting those laws passed, and then the educational impact of those laws, I think, is quite key. Laws like quotas, they, as rough and blunt an instrument as they are, they are a wake-up call within hiring, pay. Corporate CEOs who get their annual evaluation based on how they achieve diversity all throughout the food chain of a corporation. I think this kind of stuff that has strong teeth to it, we need. Funding, follow the funding. We need work to fund this. We know a lot about what works to end violence against women. We've been sitting on, as the world's largest economy, IVAWA, for all these years, International Violence Against Women Act. Someone can do the math, I'm sure somebody in your team, whatever 1 or 2% of the military budget we would have to reduce to fund IVAWA a couple of times. We know how much resources are needed for this work to happen, to refund UNFPA. Lots of these things are happening, but I think we need to also call out where the funding goes. And fourth, look, there is nothing like the force of women's organizing, Me Too, and Black Lives Matter in terms of racial justice issues, and all the hundreds of local movements as well. Need to continue, and that needs funding and support, support from the global north, but letting it happen and supporting it, making sure that those who march don't get arrested. We have got to remember that kind of making those in power feel discomfort in their power is a huge voice for change, and it is what feminist activism, I feel awkward saying that, but I will say that what I've learned from feminist activism is that, and it's got to continue.
This has been such an extraordinarily rich discussion. I just wish the clock wouldn't intrude because we are at that terrible moment when we have to close. But each of you has brought so much wisdom, so much knowledge, so much experience to this topic. And I think we've all learned a great deal. You've made us so much smarter. Now we really have to go and implement, execute, continue to organize, to really begin to shift these attitudes that have posed such an obstacle to progress, yes, for women and girls, but also holding men back for not benefiting from what genuine equality would bring to everybody. So to Natalia, to Molly, to Allison, to Gary, I can't thank you enough from all of us for your being such wonderful conversationalists and experts on this topic, for joining us, but more importantly, and perhaps most importantly, for what you do every day. I don't think any of us will leave this conversation without remembering some of the things that you have transferred to each of us, and also remembering what it is that your organizations are doing, whether they're NGOs or the private sector or in the multilateral structure of the United Nations, to truly make a difference. So thank you so much. Thank you, Anisha and Jenny. To all of you who are joining us, Gary mentioned laws as one of his last points, and I just want to invite you all back on February the 25th, when we will be looking at another barrier, getting these laws implemented and enforced, not just adopted and passed, but really having them make a difference. So the title of our next session in this series will be Making Laws Work for Women and Girls. So please join us then. Thank you again. Let's all work to accelerate progress for women and girls, for men and women, men and boys everywhere, together for equality. Carry on, stay well, and ever onward. Thank you all.
Thanks for having us.